Hello everyone, welcome back. If you are an eyeshadow palette lover who's really ready for spring, you have clicked on the right video. And I say that because today, as I've done the past couple of years, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 spring eyeshadow palettes. For springtime, I look for palettes that have lighter tones, peaches, pinks, lavenders, greens. Of course, you'll find some neutrals and browns in all of these palettes, but I think that's a good thing. I personally would not use a palette of all pastel spring colors. That's just me personally. But you'll also find within these 10 palettes, which are of all different price ranges, by the way, those beautiful spring-like colors I was just referring to in all different formulas. So why don't I begin with the two newest palettes to my eyeshadow collection. This is the Tartelette Full Bloom eyeshadow palette. This palette contains 28 eyeshadows and retails for $52. This is a much bigger palette than I am typically drawn to, but you guys actually convinced me to go and purchase it. I've received several comments over the last couple of months, I think, since this launched, asking me if I was going to buy it, if I was going to review it, if I was going to do any makeup looks with it. I put off purchasing it because I already owned the Tartelette in Bloom, and then I owned the palettes that came out at holiday time that were also smaller versions of the Tartelette in Bloom palette. I really like the Tartelette in Bloom. I really like the original Tartelette. I've been using that for years. Then there's Tartelette Toasty, and then Bloom. I think there's just those three. I could be wrong though. Well, now I have this one because I just couldn't hold out anymore and so many people were asking about it. And I do not regret my decision to purchase this palette. And by the way, it is what I currently have on my eyes. I do not feel like the swatches of this palette do it justice. Although I will say that some of the lighter mattes, in my opinion, could be a little bit more pigmented. They feel very buttery, and even though they don't swatch that well, they do perform a little bit better when applied to the lid, but they're not amazing. However, I still think this palette is worth the price. I still feel like it's worth purchasing if you've been on the fence because the shimmers are beautiful. I have had no issues with the darker matte colors at all. And to be honest with you, sometimes having eyeshadows that aren't so richly pigmented, the formula is more sheer but buildable. Sometimes that's better for an eyeshadow beginner. If you are someone who goes very heavy-handed with your eyeshadow application, then these shades being not so richly pigmented might not be the worst thing ever. And look at this fabulous big mirror. Up next is the Urban Decay Wild Greens eyeshadow palette. About a week or two ago, I posted a reel on Instagram demonstrating this palette, doing a quick makeup tutorial with it. And I showed some swatches in that reel. And I'm not gonna lie, I am not a very good swatcher. Even after all of these years making YouTube videos, I cannot seem to get down the art of a good eyeshadow swatch. So hopefully these are okay and you can get the idea of how these eyeshadows perform. However, I do feel like they perform a lot better when using brushes and applied to my eyes versus when they are swatched. That's why I don't always love to put a lot of stock into swatches. I don't base a lot of my opinions on the swatches. Obviously, if I see them swatched and they just go on like butter and the pigmentation is just bold and incredible, then you kind of know that, hey, that palette is going to be super pigmented and definitely high quality. However, sometimes eyeshadows don't swatch that well, but yet they still perform okay on the eyes. Do I think that the formula of this palette is out of this world, best I've ever tried? No, but I do think this is a fun palette for spring. I think that it's a great way to try shades that might be out of your comfort zone. It definitely was out of my comfort zone. I did receive one comment, I think, on my Instagram reel when I posted this palette that it shouldn't be called Wild Greens because there's only 4 green shades in here. There's actually 5. This one on the end does definitely have a green undertone. But really, how practical would an all green eyeshadow palette be. I like that this has some other shades in it. The beautiful peaches, the rich chocolate brown, the neutral transition shade. A palette has to be able to give you more than one or two similar looks. So I think Urban Decay did a really, really good job with this. Okay, next up I've got 3 Colourpop eyeshadow palettes that just scream springtime to me. Actually, there are more than just these 3. I could do this video just on Colourpop eyeshadow palettes that I think are beautiful for spring, but I narrowed it down to 3, and these are my favorites. Starting off with the Smoke and Roses. If the Tarte Full Bloom palette is just not in your budget, you're definitely going to want to try this one from Colourpop. This palette is about $20 less than this one. It has a lot of similar shades. The quality of this palette is really impressive. I find the shimmers in both palettes to be very similar. Both can be used wet or dry. Obviously, if you dampen your brush, you're going to get a little bit more intensity from those shimmers. I have had really good luck with the mattes in this eyeshadow palette as well. Some of the mattes, and I find this to be true across the board with Colourpop, can be a little bit patchy and a little bit more difficult to blend, but it's obviously not bad enough that I wouldn't recommend the palettes. This palette, as well as the other 2 I'll be talking about, overall are excellent quality, especially for the price. And here are swatches of my next 2 Colourpop picks. This one is the Wannabe palette. So this is a beautiful warm spring palette from Colourpop. And then this is a beautiful cool toned spring palette from Colourpop. This is called Of Quartz. This is for my cool toned eyeshadow lovers. I feel like some of you might disagree with me that this is a springtime palette. I feel like these cool toned shimmers are beautiful for spring. And this palette is just so pretty. I had to include it in this video. Okay, up next are 2 eyeshadow palettes from Sigma. Sigma makes some of my all-time favorite eyeshadow palettes, and these 2 are at the top of the list. The Cinderella palette. I honestly thought that this would be gone by now. I assumed when I first got it and reviewed it that it was going to be limited edition. And maybe it is, but it's actually still available for purchase. So I had to, this is another palette I just had to put in this video because, well, look at it. It's stunning. When it comes to the matte shadows in Sigma palettes, there is no patchiness. They are extremely easy to blend in my experience. I love that it comes with a dual-ended brush. Sigma makes some of the best brushes on the market. This eyeshadow palette is a great way to experiment with eyeshadow colors you may not have considered before. This turquoise is gorgeous. This shimmering color right here, what is the name? Does it have a name? Yes, it has a name. It's called One of a Kind, and that is an appropriate name for the shade because I really don't have any other eyeshadow colors in my collection that look like this. And I also love Corderosa. In fact, this palette appeared in last year's Top Spring Palettes video as well as the year before. This is one of the few eyeshadow palettes that contains these pinky burgundy colors that have a lot of red undertone in them that I can actually wear without having my eyes get irritated. As a lot of my viewers know, I have had problems in the past with mostly Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadows, sometimes Natasha Denona as well. Any of their eyeshadows that have that reddish undertone in them have a tendency to irritate my eyes. It's either the red dye number 5 or the carmine, something like that, that my eyes just do not like. So they get irritated and red. So I do tend to avoid palettes that have a lot of those burgundy plum type of shades. There's really just 2 shades in this palette that I was a little bit worried about, Damask and Shakespeare, but I have had no problems with them. I love this shimmering gold. This is one of the best matte browns I've ever used. It's the perfect neutral brown. It's not too warm, not too cool. If you have not yet tried this palette and you like these type of warmer, pinkier tones, I insist that you try this palette. Palette number 8 is this one from Huda Beauty. It is the Rose Quartz eyeshadow palette. I think you can tell just by looking at it and by these swatches that this also contains several really unique colors, really unique finishes. I'm not gonna lie, I've never used this shade right here, Love Stone, which is sort of like a clear gloss. I have such oily lids, there is no way, even though I like the look of a glossy lid when I've seen it in the evening or in editorial work, I think it looks pretty, but it's not for me. So I do not use this particular shade. When I first got this palette, I had so much fun playing around with it. I oohed and ahed over the results I achieved from some of these shades like Cosmic Love and Blissful and Moon Magic. You just didn't know what you were going to get when you applied it, either with your finger or a brush. You weren't sure what shifts the shadows were going to bring forward. And I just love this palette. I think it is so much fun. If you love lavenders and pinks, but also want the ability to do just a neutral, everyday look, it's all right here in this palette. Now, if lavenders and pinks are not your thing, maybe you prefer peaches and corals and browns in the springtime, then look no further than this Morphe 35X Big Primpin. I bought this on a whim when I was at the Morphe store, I think about 2 months ago. I glanced at it and I thought, ooh, that's pretty. And I don't have a lot of palettes that have this type of color combination that has so many peachy tones. And then what really drew me to this palette were these sort of golden and bronzy and champagne shimmers. I feel like this is a great palette for both spring and summer, although it's not like you couldn't wear any of these palettes during the summertime or year-round for that matter. This palette just screams spring, summer to me, not just spring. And all of these matte browns are great. Some people love Morphe eyeshadows, some people hate them. I have said many times in my videos that I was no longer going to buy Morphe palettes because I don't like the size of them. These palettes are too big, in my opinion. I prefer smaller size palettes, but I just couldn't help myself. Morphe is so affordable, and I just love playing with palettes like this. It's like when you're a kid and you get one of those big boxes of crayons that had like 100 different shades or something like that. It was just so fun to start coloring, even though you've seen all those colors before, just to have them all right there in front of you and just play. I don't know. That's how I view these palettes sometimes. I just can't help myself. I just want to take it home and play with it, and I'm so happy I decided to get this one. And finally, we've come to the last palette in my top 10 spring eyeshadow palettes video. This one might come as a surprise to many of you because I think when you look at it, you might not think spring, but I don't know. I do feel like this is a beautiful springtime palette. It's from Persona Cosmetics, and this is the Identity 2 palette. I wanted to put this palette in this video because not only do I think it's a beautiful one to achieve springtime looks, but I also feel like it's a very underrated palette. Persona, the brand as a whole, I don't feel gets enough love on social media, on YouTube, on TikTok, and Instagram. I think that Sona, who is the makeup artist and creator behind Persona, has done an amazing job with her brand. All of the products I've tried from Persona have been so, so good. Of course, Sona is a makeup artist, so she had her experience behind her when formulating her products, and these eyeshadows are some of the best on the market. And springtime, I feel, is a great season to play with some bolder color on your eyes. Most of us are coming out of long, horribly depressing winters, although I live in Las Vegas, so my winters aren't too bad. But I grew up in Michigan and I lived in Minnesota for several years, so I know what it's like to live through some brutal winters. And when spring comes, I want to break out my brighter clothes, my brighter makeup, my floral dresses, clearly, and I like to put some color on my eyes. So if you're in the market for a very versatile eyeshadow palette that is of extremely high quality, then you definitely want to check out the Persona eyeshadow palettes, either Identity 1 or this one, Identity 2. I just happen to think that this is a fun one for spring to experiment with a little bit more color. All right, those are my picks for the 10 prettiest eyeshadow palettes for springtime. Of course, I do not own every eyeshadow on the market, so this list isn't based on every eyeshadow palette that ever was. It's just based on the ones that I reach for often, that I truly feel bring about feelings of springtime and that I feel I can achieve beautiful springtime looks with. If you have any palettes that just scream springtime to you, please let us all know in the comments. I would love to hear about them. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate that. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. I do try to upload new content at least twice per week. You can also find more content from me on TikTok and Instagram. It's all under the same name, Risa Does Makeup. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope to see you in my next video.